50. So before we start, I'll just introduce myself really quickly. I'm Julie Fry. I am the founder and CEO of Your Expert Guest. We're a podcast guest strategy and booking agency. So we connect experts in their industry to the perfect podcast to get in front of their target audience. And I'm excited to be presenting here at the Age of Conversation Summit, I think it's the first Age of Conversation Summit. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So there are some times that I'm going to ask you questions and I'd love you to answer them in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and just shout it out. But if you do have burning questions, pop them in the chat, and then our room parent, Michelle, will monitor those, and we'll make sure that we get as many answered as we can. So let's begin. Getting more clients with podcast interviews. So before we start, and this is something I'd love for you to answer in the chat or take yourself off mute, who listens to podcasts? And if you do, what are some of your favorites, or what's one favorite podcast of yours? Don't be shy.
Hey, I listen to some languages lessons.
Oh, nice. Like learning languages?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I do that too. When I want to learn something new, oftentimes I'll go to a podcast even before I go to YouTube to learn something new. Nice. Awesome. Well, if you can't tell behind me, I don't know if you guys can see who that painting is of. Does anybody have any ideas? Any guesses? Oh, I'm just checking out. So Chantal likes true crime and history. Ooh, Ted McGregor, Reply All. I've never heard of that one. That sounds kind of fun. Mara, How Not to Get Murdered. Love it. I love asking this question because I hear of all these podcasts I've never heard of before. And so many people love the true crime. I've never listened to a true crime podcast before. I like funny. So yes, Ted, you nailed it. It's Conan. I am a huge Conan O'Brien fan. He's a frequent appearer in my newsletter, and I talk about him on social media a lot. I'm hoping maybe someday I'll get to meet him, but yes, that is Conan behind me. So he has a great podcast called Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. Pixel art. Love it. All right, so why podcasts? Why would you want to go on a podcast as a guest? Does anybody have any ideas why, before I switch to the next slide? All right, well, I'm just going to dig in. So there's lots of benefits. I've listed my top 6, and I'm going to cover these really quickly. So number one is it boosts your credibility. So if you are an expert, why doesn't somebody type into the chat, what are you known for? Like, what are you an expert in? Awesome. Amber says you can get in front of people who aren't your typical audience. That's one of my top benefits. Is if you're listening to a podcast and you're guesting on that, it can get you in front of people that have never ever heard of you before. And if you've ever spoken before at events, it works a very similar way, where if you're invited to speak at a conference or an event, you're getting to get in front of people that don't know who you are, and hopefully you resonate with them, they fall in love with you, and then they follow you on social or subscribe to your email list or whatever it is that you want them to do. Awesome. So C-Line is expert in hotels. Very cool. And Chantal is an expert in travel and bartending. Nice. I'd like to travel with you and have you as my personal bartender. Mara has got travel, destination sales and marketing, sustainability. You have a lot of talents. Marta, basketball officiating. Okay. So, and if you can believe it, there is probably a podcast for basketball officiating. And do you listen to them?
So actually, there is no podcast about it.
You're kidding. I'm surprised. I'm very surprised, because usually there's a podcast for everything. There might be one for sports officiating.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so you can also grow your network. So that's one of the things I love about going on a podcast, is typically when you're doing the chit chat with the host before the actual interview, the host you get a chance to know them a little bit. And I always like to ask them, how can I be a resource for you? Or what do you need help with? And perhaps they're looking for a specific type of guest. I have a big network. And so usually I can kind of connect them to somebody that might be a good fit for their podcast. So use that as an opportunity to build your network. The first podcast I was on in 2014 was with a business coach for female entrepreneurs. And she was just starting her podcast. She invited me to come on. I said yes, not really knowing what to expect. We had a really fun conversation. Fast forward to 3 years later, she had really grown her audience and was looking to speak at conferences. My business hosted an annual conference for female entrepreneurs. So she came in as my keynote speaker. She then introduced me to a very large sponsor for my event and helped sell tickets for the event. So that one podcast appearance that I made in 2014 led to tens of thousands of dollars in revenue for my business. It led to great sponsor relationships. It led to a really great relationship and friendship with her. So you just never know where those appearances are going to go. Another really kind of hidden benefit of podcast guesting is improving your SEO. So, sorry, I didn't mean to go forward yet. Getting on podcasts, usually if it's a show that kind of takes it seriously and posts show notes on their website. In the show notes, they will link back to your website and your social media profiles. And so what that does for you is Google likes it. So Google likes it. The more organic website links that point back to you, Google says, oh, this must be a legit and relevant site. And it will get your site shown up more often in search results. So that is something that's really, really cool to take advantage of. We talked about reaching new audiences. One of the things I love most about it, it's free. So I know a lot of you are in the travel and event space. I love travel and events. However, I do have to say, I love being business on the top and party on the bottom and being able to show up, have an interview, have a conversation with somebody for 30 to 45 minutes, and then have it be a piece of marketing for my business that lives on forever, even if that podcast stops producing. You don't have to book a plane ticket, get on a plane, go book a hotel room, spend a few nights away from home. You can do it all from the comfort of your home office, which is awesome. And if you are doing it with a strategy in mind, podcast guesting can lead to new clients and leads, which I love talking about that piece with my clients. So question is, how do I get booked? So I'm curious, have any of you been booked on podcasts as a guest before? And feel free to pop that in the chat or just shout it out. Yes, Ted, which one have you been on? And Amber has been, oh, okay. None that you should mention here. How about Amber? Which podcast have you been on, or which podcasts? Oh, Columbus Weddings, nice. Okay, Ted's been fly fishing related. Chrissy, how about you?
I was on the Made by Marketing podcast, which is Social Natives.
Oh, awesome. Love it. Love it. Very cool. So some of you have had that experience. And how, for those of you that have been on podcasts, did you like it? Did you hate it? Was it meh?
I was super nervous.
And was it easier than you thought it would be?
It was, I think, because I knew the interviewer pretty well. So we had a good kind of rapport throughout it. Nice. So it made it a little bit easier. But
nice. Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah, I do find that some of my clients have some mindset stuff, or especially if they are nervous about public speaking, they kind of equate it with public speaking. And I always take it back to, it is literally a conversation with one other person. So if you think about it in that way, there's nothing to be nervous about. And then the really cool part is, if you do, like, let's say you have a coughing attack in the middle of it, or your dog barges in, most of the podcast hosts have editors that can just edit it right out. So it's like the best of both worlds. Like, you get to have this very intimate conversation, and they get to fix it if the wheels fall off. So anyway, but before you go on to podcasts, I always encourage my clients to ask these questions. So who is your target audience? Like, who are your best clients? Picture them in your head, down to like, if there's an actual person that's your favorite client, like picture them. As those are the shows that those people listen to are the shows that you want to get on. So think about like, what would they be listening to? Another great question is, what problem are you solving? So most of us as business owners or experts in our industry are helping people like solve a problem or alleviate some kind of pain. So what's the pain that they have? A great tip that I like to think of is going back and looking at testimonials, or things that clients have said back to me about working with me, and use their words. So I help busy entrepreneurs get booked on podcasts. So that could be a topic that I reach out to a podcast host to say, hey, I'd love to come on your show and have a conversation about how to get booked on podcasts when you're a busy entrepreneur. Taking it a step further is, what solution are you providing? So what do you want the listener to come away with after the conversation or hearing your interview? I'm talking a little bit now about when you're reaching out to hosts to get onto podcasts, and when you craft that email to say, hey, you know, I'm Ted and I'm an expert in fly fishing. Here are some of the things that I talk about and that the listeners will learn. I don't know anything about fly fishing, so maybe it's like, what type of fly to use, what kind of fishing, where to go. I don't know. I'm just totally spitballing here, but come up with a few listener takeaways of what people will learn and use those in your outreach. You want to make it easy for the host to say yes to you. And the way you do that is by making it really clear what value you're going to provide to their audience. So how to find perfect podcasts. So I'm just doing a little time check here, see how I'm doing. Okay, great. How to find perfect podcasts. You want to start with your personal network. Most of us have a pretty long list of people that we know and that they know, like, and trust us. And they want to help us. They want to help us accomplish our goals, but they are busy running their own lives, running their businesses, doing their job, figuring out how to manage homeschool, which we had our first day of today. Kids learning remotely. So, and of course there were technical difficulties. So I'm really glad I didn't have this talk scheduled for 8:30 this morning. But what I'm saying by that is that you have all these people who really love you and they want to help you. So if you make a very direct and specific ask that, hey, you know, I'm an expert in travel and bartending. I'm going to go back to whoever that was. And I would love to have conversations on podcasts about that. They're going to want to help you and just say, like, here are some podcast categories that I'd be a great fit for, you know, travel, beverage, bartenders. Who do you know, or do you know anybody who has a podcast in those categories? If so, I would be so grateful for an introduction. So those are just a few ideas of how you can talk to your personal network and just make them aware of what you are interested in doing, which is talking on podcasts, and how to make that connection between your network and the people that host podcasts. Another thing that I would suggest is look at your competition and or your mentors. So are you noticing that they're on any podcasts? You can, an easy way to find this out is you can Google whoever it is and type their name and then type in podcast interview, and it will pull up any relevant podcast interviews that they've been on. The other way is to search Apple and Spotify. Each of the podcast platforms works as a search engine, so to speak. So if you type in Apple Podcasts and then podcasts in your specific area of expertise, events. It will show you all of the relevant podcasts that either are about events or that have had events as a topic. The podcast may not be about events, but they might have, like, maybe it's a marketing podcast, but they brought in somebody who specifically talks about marketing events. So it's cool because it kind of does double duty of showing you podcasts that talk about that category and that are also maybe a different category, but they've had an episode about events. Does that make sense? Are there any questions? I'll pause for a second just to let you guys pop something into the chat or take yourself off mute and ask anything. Oops.
So far, no questions in the chat.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate that. All right. We're going to go on to leveraging. So once you've been on a podcast interview, which we've had a few people that have, how can you leverage that interview to either, you can use that for additional content for your business. You can approach the interview in such a way that you can be intentional about getting leads for your business for that podcast, or you could even get sales from being on a podcast. So I'll talk a little bit about the ways that you can do that. First and foremost, storytelling. So here we are at a virtual summit about the age of conversation. And through conversation, oftentimes we tell each other stories. Humans, we are hardwired to learn through stories. You look at the way that stories have been passed down throughout history. That's how we learn. That's what engages us. I feel like I read somewhere the average attention span now is something like, I don't know, 40 seconds. But we can suspend that for a good story for a good 2 to 3 hours if it's a great movie, right? Or a really good book. You know, we just keep turning the pages because we want to see how the story ends or where the story is going to take us. So I really encourage, when you are on a podcast, to use storytelling. It's a great way to inform, be interesting, or inspire the people that hear you on podcasts. It also provides a way for listeners to connect with you. So when I go onto podcasts to, talk about the podcast industry or getting on podcasts, I talk a lot about my own personal journey, which includes a chronic illness that I was diagnosed with 6 years ago and the roller coaster ride that's been. I talk a lot about really severe clinical depression that I experienced last year, which led to me selling a very successful business that I had for 6 years. And then really what led me back to this business. So people, when they hear those stories, I often get emails or comments on social media from people that say, "Oh, I heard you on such and such podcast. And, I love that you shared about your depression. I also struggle with depression." So anything that you can do to kind of showcase your humanity, people really, really appreciate that. And I think now more than ever, we want to connect with each other. We've been kind of separated for so many months now that anything you can do to kind of bring back real human interaction is really appreciated by other people. If you aren't comfortable sharing your own stories, or you feel like it's not really relevant to what you're talking about on podcasts, then share personal stories of other people or clients that you work with or colleagues. Just anytime you can pull stories in, they're often entertaining. They kind of keep people on the edge of their seat. They're very engaging. So think about how you can incorporate storytelling into your podcast chat. A great book on storytelling is Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. If you haven't read that, oh my gosh, it is my very favorite business book right now. The other piece that really comes into play if you are looking to go on podcasts to build your business as a marketing strategy is having a single and really clear call to action. So you want people, so after they hear you on a podcast, they're intrigued by what you're talking about, you've answered some questions, either you've taught them something or you've been really inspiring or really interesting. What do you want them to do after they hear you? The key is to pick one. I've listed several here that are quite common. You can come up with your own. There's probably something else that I haven't thought of that could be here, and pick one of them. You don't want to confuse people by giving them like 3 choices, because then they're not going to choose any. People get overwhelmed when they have too many things for their brain to think about, and they're just like, bleh, I'm not going to do anything. So you can join a free Facebook group if that's something that you do. They can book a free call with you to learn more. They can get a free resource. Maybe like you have some great bartending or some great alcoholic recipes, like put together a PDF with your favorite recipe for drinks for fall, and they can download that. So many different things you can do. They can follow you on social media. And then once the listener does this, then they are going to be into your funnel. Okay, bye. Okay, there you go, real time. That's my kiddo. So those are examples of calls to action that you can use to help get the listener to get into your world, and then eventually get to know you over time, and then possibly do business with you. And so the last piece that is really key is tracking and measuring. So if you get really serious about going on podcasts as a guest, you want to set up a way to track the results from each appearance. So I have a really simple spreadsheet that I've done that has the name of the podcast, what the interview topic was, what did we talk about, the date that it aired, and then 30 days after that, I look at how many leads or how many email subscribers did I get from that episode, and then revenue, if I did get any revenue from it. So I've been guesting on podcasts, I want to say, for about 4 months now, and I'm noticing a trend of that podcasts in the branding space, LinkedIn, like LinkedIn marketing and sales related podcasts, are really revenue and lead drivers for my business. So that's something that is really helpful, but then you can start to do more of what's working and stop doing the things that aren't moving the needle, so that you're not wasting your time. That is pretty much it. I do have a slide here for ways that I work with clients. So I do offer a done-for-you booking service where I work with clients to get them on their perfect fit shows. I also offer one-on-one strategy calls where we can talk about how to frame your expertise into interview topics, and then how to find perfect fit shows. And then I have a group program that is for 10 people at a time. The next one is launching in October, the first week of October. And it's a combination of training, masterminding with the other participants about your topics, about how to find good shows for you, like tapping into each other's networks. We actually do the work on the call so that you don't have to then come back and do work. So we just do it all on the call. So then by the end of the 6 sessions, you're getting booked on podcasts. So that's really cool. That's $597. And I can email information if anybody wants information about that. So what kind of questions have come to mind for anyone? Feel free to take yourself off mute or just pop it in the chat.
I have one question. This is
Awesome.
Chrissy.
Hi, Chrissy.
For the tracking and measuring portion of the process, recommend, because obviously I'm assuming you're doing like a bunch of guest appearances per month, so you can't just look at how many email subscribers you got just in that past month,
right,
when you have multiple programs.
Right.
Doing. So do you recommend having, like, with your call to action, like a specific URL or something for the freebie or whatever it is?
It's really helpful if you do that. You can use a tool, it's called Pretty Links, to customize links for each episode that you do. I have many clients that do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, if you have the ability, like I don't do that. My resource on my website is a really fun quiz.
Okay.
And if any of you are interested, it's at yourexpertguest.com, and you can take the quiz, and it takes 2 minutes. It's about, could you leverage podcast interviews to grow your visibility? And in that quiz, I think I ask, like, how did you hear about us? So that way I know where they came from.
Cool.
Yeah, great question. Any other questions? Cool. Oh, Michelle, where did you go?
Oh, I'm here. Sorry, I was
Okay.
on mute.
Is there anything in the chat that we should
No,
know
no
about?
questions in the chat.
Okay.
It looks pretty clean.
Okay.
Yeah, so if anyone else has anything, feel free to ask it. I think that was a really great conversation. I really loved how you stressed that you really need to connect with people with personal stories, right? Like you hear a lot of podcasts and it's a lot of selling, a lot of shilling, a lot of,
Yeah.
right, a lot of corporate, mumbo jumbo, right?
Yeah,
And it's hard to
totally.
connect with people, especially when you're not right in front of them, with that type of, not story. So it's definitely very,
it's definitely about having a conversation and not about selling, not about pitching. It's about relationship building, just like everything is and should be.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, there's a podcast for everything. There's an event for everything, right?
Yes,
So
totally.
it's really infiltrated our world these days.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, feel free to reach out. My email address is julie@yourexpertguest.com if you have any questions. And I love to connect with new people. And the best place to do that for me is on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me there, I'd love to connect with you.
All right, great. So we'll end the session just a little bit early, and feel free to stay in the room if you'd like to join the next session with Ted McGregor. It's on future-focused relevant content engagement planning. In the meanwhile, I'll put the agenda up for the rest of the day, and stay tuned.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Hey, Michelle, I think I have a pre-recorded video if you're gonna.
Yes, so I do have the file. Yeah, so it looks like it's just about under 30 minutes. So we'll have like a minute or two at the end for some Q&A. But also you can monitor the chat while I'm playing the video. Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll monitor the chat and answer any questions, stuff like that come in through the chat. And I'll also just kind of post like at the beginning, if anybody wants to kind of put any questions in chat, I'll be around.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I can introduce you first as well. That way everybody knows.
Yeah, sure thing.
All right, I'm gonna put on some music.